The artist that we're looking at right now is an artist from the Harlem Renaissance. So we just went from the Italian Renaissance, and we jumped ahead just a little bit to to the late 1800s, and she died in 1962. So this is pretty recent. But to the Harlem Renaissance, which is another form of rebirth, right? The Italian Renaissance was a rebirth of Roman ideas, and the Harlem Renaissance is a rebirth of African American culture and ideas. And I think this person is perfect to talk about because she actually does draw a lot of inspiration from those classical sculptures that we've been studying all along.
Right, so a lot of her stuff is highly realistic, kind of emotional in nature, so really kind of drawing back from the things that we've talked about in the rest of the unit. So Greek and Roman sculpture, work from the Renaissance. So this is an African-American woman, and unfortunately, we're talking about, the early 20th century when she was getting started. Her father really discouraged her, being involved in art and wanted her to get, a real job and things like that. And so from the beginning, she just didn't have an easy road to her art making career. So she dabbled some and then eventually became an art teacher, which, hey, great profession, right?
No complaints there.
You're right. So she became an art teacher, and she actually, had an influence on many other famous African-American artists like Jacob Lawrence. She was a very impactful woman. She was rejected from the Royal Academy because simply her race. And so it's a tragedy, but also, and when she died, they said, a lot of people didn't know who she was, but now she is a very well-known artist, and her most famous work is this of a little boy. So you can see the realism here, and you can sense some emotion here in this boy, even though it's just a simple bust.
And that's really hard to achieve in a medium like clay. She primarily worked in clay. This one she was fortunate enough to have cast in bronze. That was kind of the standard if you were to make a large-scale clay sculpture. The idea wasn't to leave it that way. Like we studied the terracotta soldiers that were clay, full-size people. Those had to be fired in separate pieces and then assembled, and it was this whole big process. So, in this time period, if you made a clay sculpture, it needed to be cast in a more permanent material like bronze or some other metal. And she, unfortunately, just didn't have the support, didn't have the funds to be able to do that, or to even to be able to store her artwork in its raw clay form. And guys, raw clay that's unfired is so fragile. It's pretty amazing what she was able to do with that material, even if we don't, get to see all of it today in person.
One of her most famous works of art is a harp, and I love this one. So it's actually inspired by a song, and it was 16 feet tall. It no longer exists, once again, because she couldn't afford to have it cast in bronze. So it was made out of plaster and was at a fair, and some small souvenir copies were sold. But it was supposed to be a harp, and it featured 12 African-American young people, kind of going from shorter to taller and bigger. And so they represented the strings, and in the front there's a man kneeling and offering up music. So, like I said, she didn't have the funds to cast this in bronze or move it or store it. And so it was just a temporary installation, and then was destroyed after the fair. But I just love this interpretation of a harp and these young singing children. It's just beautiful.
Plus, what an original idea. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a sculpture that looks like that. And it's so impactful, too. And all of their faces, I mean, this is kind of a strange composition. It's a little surreal in that, this isn't something you could see in everyday life. But the way that the faces are sculpted is just so realistic, it's so natural. I mean, going back to that sculpture of the young boy, he's not even doing anything. He's just like sitting there, really. And yet, subtle carving on his face, it just looks like there's this whole story behind him. And I think the harp helps to tell maybe some of that story.